Ladies and gentlemen,
Good evening.
Are you ready?
Okay, here we go.
You're listening to the Deal Room Podcast. Join us as we bring you the inside scoop on business sales and acquisitions. Get across trends in the area and hear the industry's best recount their real-life tips, traps, and experiences. Now, here's your host, Joanna Oakey.
Hi, it's Joanna Oakey here, and welcome back to the Deal Room Podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. Now, today we are talking to David Ferraz from Argus Business Brokers, all about the state of the market in the industrial, print, and wholesale sectors. David is the Managing Director of Argus Business Brokers and specialises in selling and valuing businesses with a really strong focus on manufacturing, wholesale and distribution businesses. David has a particularly high level of experience in selling and valuing print-related businesses, and he's also a registered business valuer by the Australian Institute of Business. In this episode today, we are talking about the state of the market in the industrial, print and wholesale sectors. We're talking about the trends, who the buyers are that are around at the moment and how they're characterised, which businesses in this industry are most saleable, and how sellers can position themselves best in this market. So without further ado, here we go with our discussion with David. David, welcome on to the Deal Room Podcast.
Thank you, Jonah. Thanks for having me this morning.
My absolute pleasure, as always, David. All right, so why don't we kick this off? How about we start off by you giving just a little bit of a background about the sorts of businesses you deal with, how long you've been in the market, just a bit of a background of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually come from a bit of a manufacturing type background, but mostly on the print side before getting into broking. I've been selling and valuing businesses for about 17 years now, and that's mostly been a focus on manufacturing, wholesale, distribution, printing, trades type businesses. So most of what I sell doesn't operate from a shop, it operates from a factory. That's pretty much the high level overview of Argus Business Brokers and me.
Love it. Okay, wonderful. Well, look, let's kick it off with just talking about the trends in the market. So what are the trends that you're seeing at the moment in this market?
So actually the trends are quite varied, and it depends on which segment of the market you're getting into. So I'll talk a little bit about each of those industry sectors we discussed, so manufacturing, wholesale, trades, and then printing. If you look at manufacturing businesses, they've always had quite good demand. So there's been a pretty strong amount of inquiries that have come through for those kind of businesses. The only ones that I'd say are a bit difficult to sell and not in that much demand are those that are very technical, so and very reliant on a very skillful owner. So, for example, I once had a display manufacturing business. The guy was extremely talented at making these magnificent displays to go into like Harvey Norman, etc., where you'd get the latest mobile phone and it's on the stand and it looks like it's made out of metal with rivets, but it's actually made out of particle board, underneath. And we'd get buyers walking in, they just look in awe at what this guy's done, but they just had no confidence that they could do it themselves. So that was actually very difficult to sell. We did get it sold, but that was a hard one. So that's manufacturing. If you move into wholesale, also there's massive demand for wholesale type businesses. But if you go and look online, try and find them, there are actually not that many available. I don't know if that's because people are just holding on to them or what that is, but the only exception to that is you get some businesses where people start to try and sell things, and they will sell the good stuff and keep all the bad stuff. So after a decade or so, they've just got a warehouse of stuff that nobody can sell and it's all outdated and covered in dust. those ones, they actually usually not making a profit by the time they get to that stage, and they can be hard to sell. But any well-managed wholesale business, very, very saleable.
Love it. Okay, and what are our, what are the? We'll get to print in a moment, but on the manufacturing and the wholesale side, what are you seeing as the size of businesses that have the most demand?
It's interesting. You'd think sort of with businesses, because there's always a pyramid. There's a hell of a lot of small businesses, and then at the peak, there's not that many of them. But for some reason or other, there seems to be a pyramid of buyers as well, that matches that. And I see pretty much demand across the scale. So, you were just recently involved in that one that we sold with just circa 1 mil type profit. And that one, we had great demand for that. And just earlier, I think you were also involved in that little chemical distribution one. And that one was like tiny, and that one also had good demand. So I think that just the sector as a whole for that. With manufacturing, I think if they're a little bit bigger, they're better, because there's the opportunity for someone who's not that skilled to walk in, and their staff that can sort of keep the machine going, so to speak, whereas if it's a smaller one, then the owner, they don't have the skills, and the product's a little bit more technical, they'd struggle. So I think in terms of size, it's across the board. Yeah.
Great. Okay. All right. And then finally, print. Let's talk about print. What are you seeing in the market in terms of trends in the print market?
I think it's quite interesting. If you look at people as a whole, they will think that the print industry is a dead industry, a dinosaur that's going backwards, the way of the video store. And to a certain extent, in certain sectors, that's true. Like you look at the forms, people used to print thousands, millions of forms for people to fill in and invoice books, and they'd go into the newsagent and browse and collect a few magazines and go home with those, and the newspapers, etc. All of those have sort of drifted into digital. But underlying that, you've got the packaging sector. So we're just using more and more packaging, sending more and more things by mail everywhere. Lots of small little businesses with their products, and along with the packaging goes the labels. So labels and packaging are going gangbusters. They're really strong sectors, and those kind of businesses are in pretty good demand, actually.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Sort of that split in the industry. Okay, great. All right, wonderful. So let's talk about the buyers. So what characterizes the kind of buyers that are around?
Okay. There's a whole cluster of different types. For the small businesses, mainly you get the owner operators. Those are the guys who sitting in their corporate jobs or whatever and getting sick and tired of working for someone else and somebody telling them what to do. And especially people with a very solidly independent mindset, they want to go out and do their own thing. So for the most part, those are smaller budget buyers, but there are those out there that have got bigger budgets. We've seen people from massive corporate positions who've been on huge salaries, and they've accumulated quite a bit of wealth, and they're looking for bigger ones too. So you get those guys. There's also acquisition buyers. There's huge amounts of those. So where they might want to grow by bolting on competitor businesses onto theirs. In the print industry, and I think different sectors are more used to it, the print industry is very, they're used to doing acquisitions. So even small businesses will get bought by other businesses. And I've had some buyers who've bought 5, 6, 7, 8 businesses from me. They just every year or so do another acquisition, rather than hiring a salesperson who then owns the sales base. They'll buy a business, and then the sales might drift off if it's a declining market, but they'll top it up with their next acquisition, and so they go and do well like that.
They're handy buys to have in your Rolodex there, David. I like it.
Yes, absolutely. Pick up the phone and there's another one gone. So,
Good one. I love it. I love it. So, in the last 2 to 5 years, would you say there has been any sort of change in the predominance of each of the particular type of buys, whether it's this sort of owner operators that are coming out of corporate, or whether these professional buyers looking for acquisition as a growth? Has there been any sort of change in either of those? You know,
I think maybe COVID and all the government incentives have had an impact on that, because people were kept in work, so there were all the JobKeeper, job savers going in there, and so the government's managed to keep, or I don't know if the government has kept it or just luck, but has kept employment extremely high and unemployment extremely low, which means there's less of the unemployed people looking for those buyer job type businesses. So that sort of dropped the demand for those smaller buyer job businesses. So that kind of buyers is less at the moment, and the acquisition type buyers are a bit more prevalent. It's interesting that sort of good economic times with high employment are bad times for selling small businesses and vice versa.
okay, all right. And so then let's talk about the saleability of businesses. Obviously, we're talking about three, different industries here, but they have a bit of similarity between them. What makes each of these businesses saleable versus not saleable, or really saleable, and really in high demand versus not?
There are quite a few things there that'll impact the saleability of a business. I think one of the things is having good financial records, and I think having good financial records is also in part dependent on having a good, quick accountant, somebody who's going to make sure that you've got the most recent financials. I often see businesses where, like now, they're still giving me 2020 financials as the most recent ones that they've got. The accountants sort of way behind with getting their documentation in order, and that's the business is just not ready, because the buyer's accountant's going to say, "Where's that stuff? I want to see 23, and I want to see 22."
Well, it's annoying to a buyer, isn't it? And of course, sets off a whole heap of red flags that you don't want set off at that point. Absolutely. So financials, 100%. I agree with you there. Get them ready. What else?
Yeah, and another thing linked to financials is often, especially with businesses that are selling a product, a lot of the businesses you'll see the stock value has got 100,000 naught. Nobody did a stock take there, and it's just 100,000 at the end of every year or what have you. So and I've seen that with a variety of sizes of businesses where they're just guessing the stock at the end of the year. And what does that mean? It means that your gross profit is an estimate, which means your bottom line profit is an estimate. And so if your opening and closing stock were quite different, then your profit is actually might be very far off what you've reported. So that's one thing that will make accountants concerned, and it'll make people less confident in the business, and they'll either not want to buy it or they'll offer a lower price because they'll base it on a conservative approach. Another thing is that I've found which impacts businesses is if people haven't sort of set the business structures up properly. So they've got 2 or 3 family businesses running through the same company, and they're just reporting one set of financials for tax. So then they want to sell one, and well, what is the financial position? What expenses belong to which business, and it becomes very messy. And again, you lose buyer confidence, and it might not make it through due diligence. and it might just, if it gets sold, punish the price quite heavily. So there's that.
Well, and I just want to add to that because I completely agree with you on the structure side. Some of the other issues that I see from a structure side as well are, is when trusts have been used and then can be quite difficult to deal with if we're particularly if we have partial sales, because there'll be need for a restructure before a sale. We're working on one right at the moment where our seller's retaining 30%, and we need to do a restructure before the sale because the only way to retain that 30% is to restructure the business and then have a share sale for a portion. And that can be a complete pain in the neck, and it can be a real trip hazard with tax as well. And the classic that we see is just that failure to get tax advice leading into sale and going in with the wrong structure of the sale to meet the structure of the business, and it's only finding out at the last point. So anyway, I don't want to railroad the conversation. I just want to, reiterate, David, I completely agree. Get your structure sorted out.
Yeah, talk to your lawyer, talk to your accountant, make sure that that's all absolutely well set up.
Well in advance.
Yeah,
well in advance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what else? What else have we got in our list?
Another thing that I see sometimes is you've got a business where you've got 3 or 4 family members working in the business, and those family members all want to leave when the business is sold. So suddenly you've got, and their roles are not clear, the hours that they work are not clear. So the buyer looks at this, who am I going to replace? How does somebody walk into a business and have to replace 3 or 4 people at the same time? Can they do it? Are they going to be able to succeed? So that sort of structure can put buyers off. So if it's okay if those family members are proper paid employees doing a professional job and most of them want to stay, so maybe just the owner wants to leave, that's probably okay. But it should be, if they're, I suppose the lesson there is that if they're family members in there, they should be professionally and properly employed by the business, and at sort of as close to arm's length as you can get. And if they're proper employees, they probably won't want to bolt out the door as soon as the owner sells. So I think that's important. And of course, one of the things is that, some businesses, if you look at their customer structures, just in terms of saleability, again, if they've got one customer that's 50, 60, 70% of sale, that's obviously going to be a very much more difficult business to sell than one that's got a good spread of customers. It's harder to correct that than other things, but it's something just to be mindful of and to adjust one's expectations if one has got a high concentration with one customer. Because often that customer may just dislike the buyer and just say, no, I'm not dealing with them. So.
Well, and I guess it's about looking at the business from a buyer's eyes as well, and working out what it is that a buyer is going to see as risk. And certainly that customer concentration may have worked for the business in the past, but absolutely is viewed as a risk from a buyer's eyes, isn't it?
I think also premises wise, there are a few things in relation to the premises. So I suppose number one, obviously first impressions last. And one of the things I often see, you walk into premises and they've got a whole corner there that's, of beds and furniture and stuff because their son's just gone overseas for 6 months and just ditched all their furniture, and they've got it stored in the corner of the factory, and they've got their kayak and motorbikes and, all sorts of things like that. So probably it should look like a business.
Right. I love it. I'd not even thought of that one. That's a really good one. That's hilarious. How often does that happen?
Well,
sounds like quite often.
Yeah, when people own their factories, they just, it becomes their second shed, so they've got to watch out.
Yeah. A bit of a spring clean of your warehouse, like it. Okay.
Yep. And then, you can just walk into a business and you'll see they've got, say, stock, old dusty boxes that are all frayed and lying in a corner. It doesn't look good and it's useless stuff. It's not worth anything to anybody. Get rid of the stuff, or some old broken machine that they cannibalizing for spares or something. Just make it look nice. It's just that people are thinking of it as where they're going to work. They tend to think of it often, I think, where am I going to park my car? Where am I going to sit? Oh, I can see. They visualize that. So if it's not very nice, then that's going to impact the saleability. So I think that's important. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you said there's two things with
Yeah, I
premises.
was
So
just thinking also in
this,
terms of the lease, like vendors who own the premises, just make sure that they know what the market rent for that place is if they're going to rent it out, and think about what sort of lease structure they want, because I have seen also quite dramatic changes in expectations in the lead up to settlement that have stuck deals up. So, for example, one factory, it was in Brookvale, and this guy had quite a big factory that he was using for quite a sort of not that large a business, and he'd been charging himself about 80,000 rent, and he was convinced that was what it was. When it came, the buyer was almost locked and loaded. Then he got his market review, and it was about 220,000 market rent for the place. So suddenly the viability of the business dropped dramatically, And so I think that's very important to do that research.
fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that concept of, the rent side, it is actually interesting how often that is left, not as part of the prime negotiation, but right at the end, okay, we'll do a market review, rent review, but then suddenly comes as a sticking point right at the end, So we've actually got a few where that's happening at the moment. So I think it's a really good point. Get that understanding right in the beginning, and it's all about that preparation side, isn't it? But here's the things to do to be really prepared.
And actually, something for an owner to think about with that rent, often people will be very focused on the value of the business if they own the premises, but a premises might, for example, typically be valued at, say, 12 times its annual rent. Just that's not an exact figure, but just ballpark, and whereas the business might be 3 times its profit. So if you reduce the rent by say 100 or 10,000, then you might gain 30,000 in value of the business. But if you increase the rent by 10,000, you increase the value by 120,000. So it's better to almost sacrifice the business value, a little bit just to get the right rent. Yeah.
Fascinating. That's a really good point, David. Love it. Putting that in my arsenal. Interesting. Okay. And what else? Did we cover everything else that you feel is relevant to saleability?
How the buyers can sort of position their business to get it, ready for sale and maximize its saleability. You know, I think some of that is just making sure again that they've got their financials all sorted and the latest stuff ready. So it's going to be all their tax returns, all their BAS ready to pull out a report on aged debtors, aged creditors, or sales by customer. Obviously you'll never provide customer names, but you've got to be ready for that, and also to at least appear to be very open, transparent, and willing to help the buyer with their due diligence, because then they'll trust it. And the moment people clam up, people always wonder what is being hidden away. So
Exactly. I completely agree. And I think it's about being open as well, because I really, my experience has been if a buyer is left to find out something that's negative about a business and knows that you have deliberately not told them, that right there can be a deal breaker. It's about keeping that trust and being open, being prepared, having the information, but also being open, I think, with it.
and actually I've heard it's said that if you're selling something and your message is entirely positive, then people don't trust it as much as if you throw a little bit of a negative in there. Well, I don't know. It's a
Probably
psychological
true.
thing.
I like it. That's
Yeah.
a really good point, isn't it? Yeah, that's right.
Another thing with saleability that I think one can learn a lot from franchisers about. They have geared their businesses up so they can sell a business to anybody. So whatever industry sector it is, they're not looking for, well, for most sectors, somebody with skill in that industry. In fact, they usually prefer someone who's maybe got good sales or management experience, and it's about the customer relationships there. So if one's got the systems and procedures and the staff in there who can do things, so that you've set the business up so that the owner doesn't need to be extremely industry experienced, So I think good systems and procedures can help a lot with that.
100%, absolutely, completely agree. Well, look, thank you so much, David, for your insight into these industries. Really fascinating hearing about what's happening in the market at the moment, and some very, very, very practical tips here about how to get your business in the best position for sale. If we have any listeners who have businesses in the industrial, print, wholesale sectors, and they want to have a bit of a chat about what they should be doing to get sale ready if they're gearing up for sale, how do they contact you, David?
Oh, yes, absolutely. They can contact me on my mobile, 0425 329 765, or can email me, dave@argusbb.com.au. Would love to hear from them.
Love it. We'll put all of that in our show notes. So if you are running along the beach right now or on your commute into work, know which one I'd prefer to be doing, then don't worry, we've got the show notes. Just pop in, you'll be able to click straight through to David. David, I just want to say a huge thank you for coming on to the Deal Room podcast today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Joanna.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Deal Room podcast. We hope you're now primed for your next deal with these pointers and have enjoyed these fascinating insights. Now, if you'd like more information about this topic, then head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com, where you'll be able to download a transcript of this episode, as well as access any contact details and any other additional information we referred to in today's podcast. Now, if you'd like to get in contact with our guests today and the services they offer, you can go ahead and check out our show notes for a link right through to them and their details. You can also book in directly with our legal eagles at Aspect Legal if you'd like to soundboard your next steps, discuss a legal question, or find out more how we can assist, whether that's with buying or selling a business, or perhaps somewhere in between. Now, don't forget to subscribe to the Deal Room podcast on your favourite podcast player to get notifications whenever a new episode is out. We'd also love to hear your feedback, so please leave us a review and rating if you're already one of our subscribers, or even if you're listening to this podcast for the very first time. Every review helps our team produce valuable content for you. Well, thanks again for listening in. You've been listening to Joanna Oakey and the Deal Room podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. See you next time. Aspect Legal has a number of great services that help businesses prepare for a sale or acquisition, to help them prepare in advance and to get transaction ready. We've also got a range of services to help guide businesses through the sale and acquisitions process. We work with clients both big and small and have different types of services depending on size and complexity. We provide a free consultation to discuss your proposed sale or acquisition. So see our show notes on how to book a time to speak with us, or head over to our website at aspectlegal.com.au.
Ladies and gentlemen.
That will conclude this evening's entertainment.
Thanks for listening to the Deal Room podcast. To find out more about this episode and other episodes in the series, check out the show notes or head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com.au.